Xynophar was having a splendidly boring day, which was exactly how he liked it. The Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species wasn't typically a hotspot for excitement. After all, dead things have a way of staying dead. But today, the universe decided to spice things up. The museum, a sprawling mess of high-tech chambers and ancient relics from species who'd long since taken the cosmic dirt nap, was a haven of dust and silence. Xynophar found comfort in cataloging extinction. It was predictable, unlike living beings who were, frankly, a royal pain in his multicolored posterior. But today, predictability packed its bags and left the building. "Attention! Imminent system-wide conflict detected," droned the museum's AI, a voice as soulless as a tax collector. Xynophar nearly dropped the holochart he was holding, a detailed map of the Klaxian bone weevil's mating rituals, which was as fascinating as it sounds. "Of course, conflict," Xynophar muttered to no one in particular. "I bet it's those Chlorvans again. Always itching to start a war over the slightest inconvenience, like running out of space beer." He shuffled over to the control panel, which was conveniently located next to the human exhibit, a peculiar section. Humans were a curious lot, known for their tenacity, stubbornness, and a penchant for surviving against all odds, until they didn't. Hence, the exhibit. Captain Jorvik Mistral, the last of his kind, floated in suspension, a man out of time and hopefully out of patience. Xynophar glanced at him with the kind of fondness one reserves for a particularly stubborn houseplant. "If I wake you, you'd better be useful, or at least entertaining," Xynophar said, tapping a button. The pod hummed to life. Jorvik's eyes snapped open, revealing the kind of confusion you'd expect from someone who just got yanked out of a really long nap. "Am I in hell, or is this just another Monday?" he croaked, shaking off the cobwebs of cryo-sleep. Xynophar chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Welcome to the museum. You're the star exhibit." "Museum?" Jorvik squinted around, eyes flitting from one display to the next. "This ain't the Smithsonian." "No," Xynophar replied, deadpan as ever. "That burned down centuries ago. This is the Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species, and guess what? You're the last human," Jorvik snorted. "Figures. Trust humanity to go extinct the one time I take a nap." Xynophar unclicked a dozen or so locks on the pod, releasing Jorvik. "We've got a situation." Seemed like the perfect time to bring in a professional troublemaker. Jorvik stepped out, stretching limbs that hadn't seen use in eons. "What kind of situation we talking? Party gone wrong, alien invasion, universe running out of coffee, civil war," Xynophar said, as if discussing the weather. Jorvik frowned. "Civil war? Who's fighting who?" "Everyone," Xynophar replied, waving a hand dismissively. "System's gone to hell in a hyperdrive." Jorvik scratched his chin, trying to process. "Always said we'd outlast the cockroaches. Well, guess what, folks? You lost the bet, but I'm here now. What's the plan?" Xynophar handed him a holopad. "Start by not dying, then maybe figure out how to stop everyone else from killing each other." "Easy, right?" Jorvik laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Stop a war? Sure, just another Tuesday then." He scanned the pad, his eyes narrowing. "What's this? Plan A, run like hell. What's Plan B?" "Work in progress," Xynophar admitted. "Typical," Jorvik muttered, tossing the pad back. "All right, let's see what humanity's stubbornness can do against a galaxy hell-bent on self-destruction." The two made their way through the museum's corridors, eerie silence punctuating their steps. Jorvik, ever the pragmatist, surveyed relics of once great civilizations. Bones, artifacts, all whispers of what once was. "Hell of a collection you got here," he said, eyeing a particularly nasty-looking skull. "We aim to preserve. After all, someone should remember," Xynophar said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. "Remember us fondly, will ya?" Jorvik quipped, shaking his head. "What about us makes us worth saving this time?" Xynophar stopped, turning to face him. "Stubbornness, pure, unadulterated refusal to give up. You humans have a knack for crawling out of the grave." "Yeah, well, I'm not planning on going back in any time soon," Jorvik said, grinning. Let's see if we can't teach this galaxy a thing or two about survival. As they reached the control center, the room buzzed with holographic displays of battles, skirmishes, and all manner of chaos. "There's your civil war," Xynophar said, gesturing to the carnage. "Got any bright ideas?" Jorvik studied the screens, the corners of his mouth turning upward. "Well, my old man always said if you can't beat him, outsmart him. Got any nukes lying around?" Xynophar blinked. "You want to nuke the problem, isn't that a bit excessive?" "Sometimes you gotta hit rock bottom before you bounce back up," Jorvik replied, the glint in his eye unmistakable. "You humans have a funny way of solving problems," Xynophar remarked. Jorvik shrugged. "Funny, that's one word for it." The AI chimed in again. "Conflict escalating. Suggest immediate intervention." "What's it think we're trying to do, have a tea party?" Jorvik grumbled, rolling his eyes. "All right, here's the plan. We need to find a way to light a fire under the right people." "Fire?" Xynophar asked, raising an eyebrow. "Metaphorically, of course," Jorvik said, smirking. "Unless you've got actual fire, never hurts to have options." The control room lights flickered ominously, as if the universe was listening and preparing to throw another wrench in the works. "Systems failing," the AI added unhelpfully. "Perfect," Jorvik said, clapping his hands. "Let's get this show on the road before everything comes crashing down around us." Xynophar sighed, already missing the quiet monotony of his previous existence. "You really believe you can stop this madness?" "Hell no," Jorvik replied. "But I'm sure gonna try." The two of them, an unlikely duo thrown together by circumstance and cosmic bad luck, marched forward into uncertainty. Jorvik, the last man standing from a world long gone, and Xynophar, a curator who never wanted this kind of excitement, set the course for a confrontation that could make or break what was left of civilization. As they approached the docking bay, Jorvik paused. "Got any ships that aren't museum pieces? We might have one," Xynophar said, pointing to a dusty corner. "The Exasperation. Fitting name," Jorvik commented, shrugging. "Let's hope it's got more life in it than a corpse." "I'll take that as a challenge," Xynophar said, tapping a few commands into his wrist device. "I've always wanted to pilot something that doesn't require a manual from the Stone Age." With that, they boarded the Exasperation, a ship whose glory days were probably a few centuries behind it. "Looks like it's held together with hope and duct tape," Jorvik observed, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. "Hope is a powerful thing," Xynophar replied, taking his place beside him. "Yeah, well, let's hope we don't end up as another exhibit," Jorvik said, firing up the engines. The ship groaned to life, a mechanical protest against being disturbed from its slumber. "Status: barely operational," the AI announced. "Just like me," Jorvik said with a grin, steering the ship into the vastness of space. "All right, Xynophar, let's go shake the universe a bit." As the Exasperation cut a path through the stars, the weight of impending conflict loomed large. Xynophar couldn't help but wonder if they were about to become just another story of failure. But Jorvik, with his irreverent humor and unyielding spirit, wasn't the type to go down quietly. "What's the first step of your grand plan?" Xynophar asked, stealing a glance at his human companion. "Simple," Jorvik said, eyes focused on the horizon. "Find allies so chaos save the galaxy." Xynophar chuckled, a sound full of irony and unexpected hope. "And if we fail?" "Then we fail spectacularly," Jorvik replied, a twinkle in his eye. "But hey, at least we'll give him a hell of a story." And so, with nothing but a prayer and a spaceship on borrowed time, they flew onward, into the unknown, ready to do what humans do best, refuse to go quietly into that good night. As the Exasperation clunked and whined its way through the void, Jorvik settled into his seat like a man acquainting himself with an old frenemy. Xynophar, his multi-eyed gaze flitting between various status indicators that all read pending doom, was less at ease. "So, what's the real deal, Zinni? Why the sudden urgency to wake the last Homo sapien from his beauty sleep? And don't give me the world peace spiel," Jorvik said, fiddling with a control stick that was so loose it felt like it might come off in his hand. Xynophar let out a sigh that sounded like a malfunctioning airlock. The war out there, he gestured vaguely at the chaos unfolding on the main holo display, is about to obliterate the solar system, which, funnily enough, includes the museum. And as much as I'd love to watch history repeat its self-destruct routine, my job security sort of hinges on keeping the exhibits intact. Jorvik leaned back, crossing his arms with a smirk. Ah, the all-save-my-collection gig, and here I thought I was the only relic worth preserving. Hardly, Xynophar replied, deadpan. It's not every day you get a chance to literally prevent your workplace from becoming the next exhibit. Jorvik scanned the control panel, an array of blinking lights that seemed to say, "You are screwed." So, how bad is it? On a scale from mild inconvenience to total annihilation, let's say it's knocking on the door of Bye-Bye Universe and it's not taking no for an answer, Xynophar said, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. Nice. And here I thought Mondays were rough. As the two settled into the cockpit, the ship's AI chimed in. Warning, probability of system failure at 87%, Jorvik snorted. 87. I've had worse odds with hangovers. Xynophar regarded the human with a mixture of curiosity and exasperation. You're disturbingly calm for someone who's literally staring death in the face. That's the thing about humanity, Zinni. We've been staring that ugly mug down for centuries. Got kinda used to it, Jorvik replied, his grin unwavering. Anyway, what's the plan? I assume you didn't wake me up just for my charming personality. Xynophar tapped his wrist device, bringing up a series of schematics too complicated to make sense of, even on a good day. There's a theory, he began, hesitating, about using a concentrated antimatter pulse to create a temporary dimensional rift. Jorvik's eyebrows shot up. Dimensional rift? You sure you're not just messing with me? It's a real thing, Xynophar insisted, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. Theoretically, it could disrupt the conflict long enough for cooler heads to prevail, but it's risky. Risky? Jorvik echoed, laughter bubbling up like a geyser. Buddy, you just woke a man from cryo-sleep to stop a galactic war. Risky is pretty much the appetizer at this point. Xynophar glanced at the display, the chaos outside continuing to escalate. We'll need the Council of Curators to agree. They're not exactly the adventurous type. Let me guess, Jorvik said, leaning forward with a wink. They prefer to let history take its course from a safe distance. Precisely, Xynophar replied, not missing a beat. But this time the course ends with us all as cosmic dust. Sounds like they need a little human persuasion, Jorvik said, rubbing his hands together. Or, as I like to call it, the art of bullshitting. With a few taps on the console, Xynophar connected the comms to the Curator Council's chamber. A moment later, the holographic display flickered to life, revealing a semicircle of decidedly unimpressed extraterrestrials. Each one looked like they'd been carved from a different kind of grumpy stone. Ah, the gang's all here, Jorvik said, flashing his best I'm not a threat smile. Evening, folks, or morning. Whatever it is in your corner of the galaxy. One of the curators, a particularly stern-looking creature with too many tentacles and not enough humor, spoke first. Xynophar, why have you woken the human? This is a matter for serious deliberation, not antics. Jorvik chimed in. Hey, I can be serious. Just not before my second cup of space coffee. Xynophar shot him a look. Apologies for the interruption, but we're facing total annihilation. The human may offer a unique perspective. A unique perspective. Another curator echoed, skepticism dripping from every syllable. What can one human possibly do to prevent a war of this magnitude? Jorvik leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Ladies, gentlemen, and tentacled beings of indeterminate gender, what say we break some rules and use a little thing called human ingenuity? I propose we bend the laws of physics until they cry uncle. The curators exchanged glances, a silent conversation of doubt and disdain. Bend the laws of physics, the stern one repeated. This isn't a child's game. No, but it is a pretty tight spot, Jorvik countered, his tone turning serious for a moment. Look, humans aren't known for playing by the rules. We're known for rewriting them when they don't suit us. Xynophar nodded, backing his human counterpart. The antimatter pulse. It could work, but we need your approval to attempt it. Silence stretched, a cosmic pause as the curators considered the audacity of the proposal. Finally, the stern curator spoke again, her voice softer but still laced with skepticism. And if it fails, Jorvik shrugged, an irrepressible twinkle in his eye, then we fail with style, but if it works, you'll have a hell of a story to tell in that museum of yours. Perhaps, the curator conceded, a reluctant nod following. But should this plan compromise the integrity of the museum, you will bear the responsibility. Deal, Jorvik said, without missing a beat. I've been bearing responsibility since before my kind went extinct. One more won't break me. With reluctant agreement secured, Xynophar cut the transmission, turning to Jorvik with a mixture of relief and apprehension. You really think it'll work? Jorvik chuckled, strapping himself back into his seat as he prepared for the insanity to follow. Hell if I know. But like my old crew used to say, when in doubt, do something stupid. Let's just hope stupid is what saves the day. Xynophar shrugged, his version of a resigned grin forming on his face. All right, let's bend those laws. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, Jorvik quipped, eyes gleaming with mischief. Let's get to work. We've got a galaxy to save. As they dove back into the chaos of the control room, the ship's lights flickering ominously above them, Xynophar couldn't help but feel a pang of something unfamiliar, a strange blend of hope and impending disaster. Maybe, just maybe, their unlikely alliance could pull off a miracle. The exasperation trembled as it surged forward, driven by the collective determination of both man and alien. The universe might not be ready for them, but that was the universe's problem. As far as Jorvik and Xynophar were concerned, they had a war to stop and physics to break. And if the galaxy didn't like it, well, they could take a number and get in line. There were bigger problems at hand. As the exasperation rattled through the void like a tin can full of angry bees, Jorvik leaned over the control panel. He tapped it with the kind of gentle persuasion that often worked on malfunctioning machinery, good old-fashioned menace. So, what's the plan, Zinni? We gonna twiddle knobs until everything either explodes or magically fixes itself? Xynophar, ever the picture of multi-eyed stress, glanced at Jorvik. Actually, I thought we'd start with frantic button mashing. It usually works in the holovids, Jorvik chuckled, the sound rich with the kind of gallows humor that comes naturally when death is a regular dinner guest. Nothing like a bit of desperation to really get the creativity flowing, huh? The ship's AI, the voice of optimism wrapped in a hardware package, chimed in. Warning, system instability increasing. Probability of catastrophic failure, 92%. Climbing the charts, Jorvik said with a grin. Never thought I'd miss my old toaster until now. At least it didn't talk back. Xynophar rubbed a weary appendage over what might have been a brow if his species had developed the concept of brows. We need to focus, Jorvik. The antimatter pulse isn't just something we can cobble together from space junk. Which is a shame, Jorvik replied. I was hoping to use one of those old slushy machines from the cafeteria. They've been good for nothing but a brain freeze since we got here. Xynophar ignored the comment, focusing instead on the holo chart. We'll need to access the museum's main energy core. Probably heavily guarded by drones who don't appreciate being unplugged, Jorvik shrugged. Drones, moans. As long as they don't have a taste for human flesh, we should be fine. Your optimism borders on delusion, Xynophar noted dryly. Yeah, well, delusion's gotten me this far, Jorvik shot back, his eyes scanning the controls again. Let's give those curators something to really worry about. As they set the ship's coordinates to the museum's power core, a thought occurred to Xynophar, something that clung like a bad smell. You do realize, he said slowly, that if this fails, they'll make you the centerpiece of the next extinction exhibit. Good luck to them, Jorvik replied, smirking. I'm pretty sure they'll have to catch me first. The exasperation docked with all the grace of a brick thrown through a window, which, to be fair, was about as much as they could have hoped for. Jorvik and Xynophar stepped off the ship, greeted by the unnerving silence of the Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species. The place was like a graveyard, only worse because the residents had the bad manners to die before anyone could slap a plaque on them. Why do I feel like I'm on a school field trip that veered way off course? Jorvik mused, looking around at the dust-covered exhibits. Consider it a hands-on history lesson, Xynophar answered. Just don't touch anything. They moved quickly, heading for the bowels of the museum where the energy core resided. As they approached, the dim lighting flickered like a bad horror movie, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The kind of atmosphere that screamed imminent doom ahead. Feels like home, Jorvik remarked. If home was an abandoned carnival with murder clowns lurking in the shadows. Reassuring, Xynophar muttered, his eyes shifting nervously. The entrance to the energy core was predictably locked down tighter than a miser's purse. The security panel blinked expectantly, waiting for codes they didn't have. Any bright ideas? Xynophar asked, glancing at Jorvik. Jorvik studied the panel with a frown. Well, I could try the old guess until it works routine. Works wonders on vending machines. Or it could trigger an alarm, Xynophar pointed out. True, but then we'd get to test our running skills, Jorvik said, his fingers tapping an improvised rhythm on the control. Or we could convince the AI to be a little less of a stickler for rules, Xynophar considered. You think sweet-talking an AI is going to work? I never underestimate the power of talking utter nonsense, Jorvik replied, leaning towards the panel. Hey, AI buddy, how about letting us in? We're on a bit of a tight schedule, what with the impending annihilation and all. There was a pause, the kind that made you wonder if you were about to get electrocuted for your troubles. Then the panel beeped, the door sliding open with a reluctant hiss. See, Jorvik grinned. Just needed a little human touch. Inside, the energy core hummed with the power of a small sun, the room filled with enough blinking lights to give a rave a run for its money. Jorvik and Xynophar moved to the central console, ready to tinker with forces best left alone. All right, Jorvik said, rolling up imaginary sleeves. Let's make some magic happen. Xynophar shot him a skeptical look. You do realize if this goes wrong, it could tear reality a new one. Yeah, but think of the stories we'll get to tell if it works, Jorvik replied, his fingers already dancing over the controls. As they worked, the museum's council decided it was the perfect time to interrupt. Their holographic forms loomed above the console, expressions ranging from mildly annoyed to downright livid. Xynophar, the stern curator began, her voice as sharp as ever, we did not authorize this level of interference. Xynophar looked up, his many eyes meeting the council's. I apologize for the breach, but the situation demands action. We're on the brink of disaster, Jorvik added, and let's be honest, you lot haven't exactly been proactive about it. The curators bristled, clearly unused to being challenged. This is a breach of protocol, one of them intoned. Yeah, hey, well, protocol's overrated, Jorvik retorted. We're dealing with a crisis, not a bake sale. The curators exchanged disapproving glances, the tension crackling like static electricity. We cannot sanction this reckless behavior, the stern curator declared. Reckless, Jorvik echoed, his voice rising. Lady, we're way past reckless. We're in last-ditch effort to save our skin's territory. Unless you've got a better plan, maybe step aside and let us work. Xynophar nodded in agreement, his resolve firm. We're running out of time, we have to try. The council, perhaps seeing the futility of further argument, reluctantly backed down. Very well, the stern curator conceded, her tone grudging. We will not interfere further. But remember, the consequences of failure rest on you. Wouldn't have it any other way, Jorvik replied, turning back to the console. Now, where were we? As they continued working, the weight of their task pressed down like a freight train. Every keystroke felt charged with the potential for both salvation and ruin. All right, so we're going to reroute the antimatter through these conduits, create the pulse, and pray it doesn't blow us all to hell, Jorvik explained, his brow furrowed with concentration. And if it does, Xynophar asked, only half joking. Then we'll go down in history, Jorvik replied, adjusting the settings with precise care. Or at least we'll get a snazzy plaque in the museum. With trembling fingers, Xynophar initiated the sequence, the room filling with a low hum that spoke of power barely contained. The core glowed brighter, its energy building to a crescendo that promised either salvation or obliteration. Here goes nothing, Jorvik muttered, his gaze fixed on the rising energy levels. Let's see if we can unmake a war. The room shuddered, the lights flickering in an epileptic dance as the antimatter pulse approached critical mass. Jorvik and Xynophar braced themselves, caught between hope and impending doom. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the universe holding its breath as it waited to see if their gamble would pay off. Then with a blinding flash the pulse was released, tearing through the fabric of space like a cosmic seam ripper. When the light faded, the room was eerily still, the only sound the steady thrum of the energy core settling back into its usual rhythm. Jorvik and Xynophar exchanged a glance, the question unspoken but clear. Did it work? The AI, ever the bearer of grim tidings, chimed in. Warning, external conditions unchanged. Probability of failure remains at 92%. Well, that's a kick in the teeth, Jorvik said, rubbing the back of his neck. I was really hoping for at least a 10% drop. Xynophar sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of their continued failure. We'll have to try something else. There's got to be a way. Jorvik nodded, his jaw set with determination. We're not beaten yet. We'll find another angle, another way in. With that, they returned to the console, ready to think outside the box, or outside the galaxy if necessary. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was refusing to quit, even when the odds were stacked higher than a politician's expense account. As they dove back into their work, the universe continued its steady march towards chaos, oblivious to the desperate efforts of two unlikely allies fighting to turn the tide. And maybe, just maybe, their tenacity would be enough to pull off the impossible. Or at the very least, they'd go out swinging, and that was worth something in itself. Just as the dust settled from their latest failed attempt at preventing cosmic calamity, the museum's AI piped up with its usual cheery alarm. Incoming hostile fleet detected. Probability of total annihilation, 78%. Jorvik let out a low whistle. Well, at least the odds are slightly better than our last gamble. I'm starting to think this museum's more popular than an unguarded bank vault during a currency crash. Xynophar, who was keen on keeping his multi-eyed head attached to his multi-necked body, scanned the holo display. They're coming for the museum. Apparently, they think we're hiding something dangerous here. Ha, Jorvik barked. If only they knew the most dangerous thing here is our incompetence. Xynophar gave him a sidelong glance. And your optimism. Some would call it charm, Jorvik replied, adjusting his jacket as though preparing for night out rather than a battle. Guess it's time to rally the troops then. Can't let a bunch of space jockeys waltz in here and ruin our carefully curated disaster. Troops, Xynophar repeated. What troops? This is a museum, not a military base. Jorvik shrugged, unfazed. We'll work with what we've got. Let's call it the exhibit resistance. I'm sure there are some folks around here who'd rather not be added to the collection under newly extinct species. Together, they made their way through the winding corridors, guided by the AI helpful and somewhat too cheerful updates on the incoming fleet's coordinates. They hurried through the Hall of Oddities, past the lifeless remains of creatures whose only crime was not staying alive long enough to hire a good PR team. The museum was eerie in its silence, a silence soon to be shattered by the sound of approaching engines. Jorvik and Xynophar found themselves outside the main security office, which, despite being labeled security, had never been used for much more than holding the occasional unruly guest overnight. Inside, they found a collection of beings from across the galaxy. There was Gorblax, a tentacled librarian who could recite entire volumes of galactic history but couldn't throw a punch to save her life. Beside her was Tilm, a towering creature of rock and metal who was more accustomed to polishing exhibits than defending them. "Attention, everyone," Jorvik announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he'd spent more time in trouble than out of it. "We've got ourselves a situation. A hostile fleet thinks we're withholding some dangerous knowledge, and they're not here to ask nicely." Gorblax's tentacles fluttered nervously. "What kind of knowledge?" Jorvik shrugged. "I'd say our knowledge of how not to blow things up, but we seem to be consistently failing at that." Xynafar stepped forward, his eyes, far too many of them in Jorvik's opinion, sweeping across the room. "We need to protect the museum. Not just for the exhibits, but for our own survival. Jorvik's right. If we don't stand together, we're all going to end up as nothing more than footnotes in some other species' history books." Tilm's deep voice rumbled through the room. "What's the plan then, human? You know more about war than the rest of us put together." Jorvik grinned, a sight that put more fear into his allies than it reassured. "Well, I've always said, when in doubt, throw sand in their eyes and run like hell. But seeing how they've got lasers and ships and we've got a bunch of old relics, I think we'll need a slightly more refined approach." They spent the next few minutes cobbling together a defense plan with all the finesse of a child trying to fix a broken toy with tape and optimism. Jorvik's strategy revolved around using the museum's layout, confusing at the best of times and positively labyrinthine at the worst, to their advantage. They'd create choke points, use the exhibits for cover, and if all else failed, hide and hope the intruders got bored. "So," Xynafar concluded, "we're basically hoping to outlast them." "Pretty much," Jorvik admitted. "But hey, humans were built for endurance, right? They couldn't kill us off easily." Gorblax's tentacles writhed with anxiety. "But they did go extinct." Details, Jorvik waved the comment off. "Let's focus on staying slightly less extinct today, shall we?" With their slapdash plan in place, they dispersed to their positions. The museum's ancient walls, which had so far stood the test of time without complaint, now seemed to creak under the tension of the impending assault. Jorvik found himself crouched behind a towering statue of a creature that looked like it had been designed by a committee of mad gods, his heart thumping like a drum in a particularly energetic parade. The AI voice permeated the silence. "Warning, hostile forces have breached the perimeter, initiating lockdown procedures." "Lockdown? Talk about shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted," Jorvik muttered to himself, peeking around the statue to catch a glimpse of the incoming invaders. The first of the enemy soldiers, clad in armor that gleamed with an unsettling blue light, moved cautiously through the entrance hall. They were met with a veritable menagerie of museum defenders, a sight that might have been comical if it wasn't so desperate. Gorblax, using her tentacles like whips, attempted to disarm a soldier, while Tilm bellowed and charged, using his size to intimidate and his rocky fists to smash with surprising precision. Jorvik, meanwhile, focused on making their lives difficult in other ways, flinging whatever he could find, dried exhibits, loose bits of ancient machinery, and occasionally a well-aimed insult. "You lot picked the wrong museum," he shouted, ducking a return volley of laser fire. "All you're gonna find here is disappointment." To his surprise, it seemed to be working. The attackers, evidently not expecting such chaos from a bunch of museum curators and oddities, were momentarily on the back foot, but Jorvik knew it wouldn't last. Professional soldiers had a habit of overcoming initial setbacks, especially when their targets were former tour guides and reanimated fossils. Xynafar, darting around with surprising agility for someone with so many legs, joined Jorvik behind the statue. His usual seriousness was marred by an expression that suggested he wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of their situation. If this keeps up, Xynophar said between breaths, we might actually survive long enough to find a better plan. Funny thing about plans, Jorvik replied, peering over the statue again. They always sound better before you try them. The tide of battle, if it could be called that, was shifting again. The invaders were regrouping, clearly intent on pushing through. Jorvik realized they'd need something a little more drastic to tip the scales in their favor. Time for Plan B, Jorvik announced, grabbing Xynophar by one of his elbows, or what passed for an elbow on a creature with so many limbs. Plan B, Xynophar asked, clearly wondering when such a plan had been concocted. Yeah, Plan B, Jorvik confirmed, dragging him along. It involves pressing a lot of buttons and hoping we don't accidentally blow up the museum. Isn't that what got us into this mess in the first place? Jorvik nodded, grinning. Exactly, but they don't know that. With Xynophar in tow, Jorvik made a beeline for the central control room, a place that promised all sorts of mayhem if you knew where to look. The AI, already racing to keep up with the rapid sequence of events, chimed in as they entered. Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols disabled. Perfect, Jorvik said, his hands flying over the controls. Let's see if we can make the museum a little less friendly for our visitors. Xynophar, watching with an expression that suggested a mixture of awe and terror, asked, "What exactly are you doing?" "Ever been to a haunted house?" Jorvik replied, hitting a series of buttons that activated the museum's ancient, long-forgotten defensive systems. The lights dimmed, replaced by a series of flickering holograms. The museum's exhibits, many of which had been dormant for centuries, sprang to life in a cacophony of roars, screeches, and unearthly sounds. The halls became a chaotic swirl of color and noise, designed to disorient and frighten. "I'm turning this place into a living nightmare," Jorvik explained with a wicked grin. "Let's see how much these guys like being part of the exhibit." The invaders, already on edge, were thrown into disarray as the museum's defenses came online with a vengeance. Holographic creatures leaped from the walls, creating the illusion of an endless army of terrifying beasts. The attackers found themselves fighting not just the defenders, but also their own imaginations. In the chaos, Jorvik and Xynophar led a rallying cry, coordinating the museum's defenders in a counterattack. With the odds suddenly more even, they pushed back, using the confusion to their advantage. Gorblax, emboldened by the chaos, lashed out with renewed vigor, her tentacles flicking like whips. "This is oddly exhilarating," she admitted, her voice rising above the din of battle. Tilm, ever the optimist even in grim circumstances, used the distraction to bulldoze through the enemy ranks, his massive form a force of nature. The tide was turning, and as Jorvik and Xynophar rejoined the fray, their makeshift army started to gain ground. The invaders, caught in a nightmare of their own making, were retreating, struggling to maintain order in the face of such unexpected resistance. "Looks like your haunted house trick is working," Xynophar noted as they pressed forward. "Yeah, well, never underestimate the power of a good scare," Jorvik replied, ducking a stray laser blast. "And if we survive this, I'm definitely charging admission." With each passing moment, their defiance took root. The museum, a place of history now alive with the spirit of resistance, stood firm against the intruding force. And as the last of the attackers stumbled back, fleeing into the void from whence they came, it seemed, if only for a moment, that they'd done the impossible. They'd held the line. Panting, bruised, and thoroughly exhausted, Jorvik and Xynophar stood amongst the remnants of their haphazard defense. Around them, the museum fell quiet once more, its exhibits settling back into their silent vigil. "We did it," Xynophar said, the disbelief apparent in his voice. "Don't sound so surprised," Jorvik replied, though he too was surprised. "We're not dead yet." The AI, ever the party pooper, chose that moment to chime in. "Warning, hostile fleet retreating. Probability of success in future engagements 62%. Always the optimist, aren't you?" Jorvik muttered, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. The museum for now was safe. But as they began the process of repairs and recuperation, Jorvik knew that their fight was far from over. The galaxy was vast and cruel, and somewhere out there another storm was surely brewing. But for today they'd won. And in a universe that seemed determined to tear itself apart, that was something worth celebrating. Jorvik Mistral gazed out over the interstellar museum of extinct species, or what was left of it. A magnificent ruin amidst the void, glittering with shattered glass and the occasional flicker of malfunctioning holo displays. If a building could look like it had just survived a bar brawl, this was it. The hostile fleet had scooted off, leaving a bigger mess than a drunken human at a Quarksian wedding. Well, Jorvik muttered to his battered reflection in a cracked window, at least we didn't die. Yet. He flexed his aching muscles, every bruise a reminder that getting involved in space battles at his age was probably not advisable. Xynophar, with his dozen eyes spinning like a cosmic slot machine, sidled up. You look like someone tried to reverse engineer you and gave up halfway through. Thanks, Xyno. I'll take that as a compliment, Jorvik grinned, trying not to wince as he leaned against the wall. What's the word from our dear AI overlord? The AI, ever punctual and overly enthusiastic, piped up. Current damage assessment, 63% structural integrity compromised. Probability of future hostile engagements, 87%. Initiate repair protocols. Jorvik shrugged. With what? Hope and duct tape. Xynophar's tentacles fluttered nervously. The council's in a spin, Jorvik. Some of them want to cut our losses, abandon the solar system, bugger off to safer pastures. Jorvik snorted, a sound that wasn't quite laughter but carried the same defiance. Of course they do, typical bureaucrats. They'd abandon their own mothers if it meant saving their skins. Which is why they're asking for your input. Me. I'm just a relic in a glass case, remember? Jorvik gestured around. But remind them that fleeing now is like leaving a bad date before dessert. Sure, it might save you some pain, but you'll miss out on the best part. So, what's the plan? Xynophar asked, with a face that said he already regretted asking. The plan, Jorvik grinned, though it was more a baring of teeth than a smile. We dig in, we fight, we go down swinging if we have to. We're part of something bigger than ourselves, Xyno. Something that, for some reason, the universe keeps trying to snuff out. That's the spirit, Xynophar sighed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Dying gloriously for a burned-out museum. Hey, remember that trip to Earth's moon you took last decade? Saw those ruins, right? Humans built that with nothing but sticks and stones and a dream, Xyno, and we're all their legacy whether we like it or not. They'd never just cut and run. Xynophar's multiple eyes blinked in synchrony, a rare spectacle. You've got a damn strange way of inspiring people, Jorvik. Comes with the territory, Jorvik shrugged. So, are you in or not? Xynophar sighed, the sigh of a being with far too many lungs. I suppose. Someone's got to make sure you don't accidentally blow up the universe while you're at it. Jorvik patted him on what he assumed was a shoulder. Good man. Now let's go rally the troops before they decide to mutiny. As they made their way back to the central hall, the museum's defenders were licking their wounds, metaphorically and literally in Gorblax's case, who had discovered that licking her own tentacles brought a surprising amount of comfort. Tilm, looking like a mountain that had just rolled over and decided to take a nap, was slowly getting to his feet. Hey Tilm, Jorvik called, how's the head? Like I've been headbutting asteroids, Tilm rumbled, a voice so deep it seemed to vibrate the very air. Good, means it's still attached, Jorvik replied. We've got work to do. The AI, without prompting, decided to add its 2 cents. Strategic analysis indicates that current defenses are insufficient. Recommended action, fortify positions, prepare for reinforcements. No kidding, Gorblax said, attempting to untangle herself from the remnants of what used to be a display on ancient Earth fauna. I'm starting to think we should just start charging admission to these guys. Come see the museum that refuses to die, Jorvik chuckled, though it was more out of habit than humor. In that case, we'd better make sure we've got something worth charging for. As the ragtag group began sorting through the debris, gathering whatever they could to reinforce their defenses, Jorvik found himself wishing for a miracle, or at least a good stiff drink. But since neither was forthcoming, he settled for a well-worn pep talk. "Listen up, folks," he called out. "I know things look about as bleak as a Quarksian winter, and it feels like the universe is using us as its personal punching bag. But we've got something they don't. We've got heart." Xynophar leaned in, whispering, "Heart? Really?" "SHH, I'm on a roll," Jorvik whispered back. "Humans," Jorvik continued, raising his voice, "we've always had a knack for surviving against the odds. Maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's stupidity, but we don't quit. We dig our heels in and fight like hell." "And when that doesn't work?" Tilm asked, arms crossed, his skepticism as apparent as the dents in his armor. "Then we get creative," Jorvik answered, eyes sparking with a blend of mischief and madness. "We throw sand in their eyes, remember." Despite everything, a ripple of laughter passed through the group. It was a small thing, but in the face of overwhelming odds, it was enough to rekindle their determination. As they worked, the AI provided what could only be described as a lecture in unhelpful optimism. Probability of success now at 37%. Increased likelihood of catastrophic failure remains high, but not insurmountable. "Gee, thanks," Gorblax muttered, wrapping a tentacle around a support beam that was more duct tape than metal at this point. "Nothing like knowing we're slightly less doomed than before." Jorvik smiled, though it was a weary one. "The universe might have it in for us, but as long as we're breathing, there's hope." "Yeah," Xynophar said, sounding unconvinced. "Hope, right." Jorvik ignored the cynicism. After all, if you couldn't be optimistic in the face of certain doom, when could you be? Iors passed in a blur of hasty repairs, whispered strategizing, and the occasional heated debate over the merits of various defensive measures. Jorvik found himself more tired than he'd ever been, even during the heyday of the human empire when all he had to worry about was which species was trying to kill him next. Finally, as the makeshift barricades were as complete as they were going to get, Jorvik called the group together once more. "All right, folks, this is it. We've got one shot at this. We'll hold the line here and make 'em work for every inch they take." "And if they take the whole museum?" Gorblax asked, her voice tinged with a mix of defiance and dread. "Then we make them regret it," Jorvik replied, locking eyes with each of them in turn. "We show them what it means to stand against the odds. We remind them why humans were once feared across the stars." There was a moment of silence, one of those rare, perfect pauses where time seems to stand still. Then, one by one, the defenders nodded, their resolve hardened by the fires of shared adversity. As the AI droned on about probabilities and potential outcomes, Jorvik allowed himself a brief, fleeting moment of hope. Maybe they'd pull off the impossible. Maybe they'd carve out a small corner of the universe where they could stand tall and proud, a testament to endurance and defiance. Or maybe they'd just go down fighting. But either way, they'd face what was coming together, battered but unbroken, a ragtag band of survivors determined to make their mark on the galaxy, even if it was just a footnote in some dusty archive in the far-flung future. "All right," Jorvik said, his voice a low growl of determination. "Let's show him what we're made of." And as the museum braced for the next onslaught, Jorvik allowed himself a small, defiant smile. Whatever happened next, they'd go down swinging, just like humans always had. And in the end, wasn't that what life was all about? The Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species was holding together with little more than spit and stubbornness, and frankly, Jorvik was short on both. As he surveyed the mess, his mind churned through the debris of ancient philosophies and forgotten technologies, seeking a flicker of inspiration. "We're screwed," he muttered, kicking a loose chunk of masonry with all the enthusiasm of a prisoner kicking the bars of his cell. If there was a manual on how to turn a museum into a fortress, he'd have gladly traded his last can of synth coffee for it. But as luck would have it, there was no such manual. Just a ragtag bunch of misfits and an AI with a penchant for stating the obvious. Probability of successful defense, 23%. Probability of catastrophic failure, 76%. The AI chirped, its voice as chipper as ever. Thank you, Professor Grimm, Jorvik grumbled, resisting the urge to yank the speaker from the wall. Zino, how's your end looking? Xynophar, doing more multitasking with those dozen eyes than an octopus on caffeine, was fiddling with a holo display. I've seen better days. Like that time I got stuck in a wormhole for a week. Nothing like living in a never-ending loop of your worst memories to make you appreciate the little things. Sounds like a vacation, Jorvik replied dryly. Look, we're gonna need a miracle. A miracle or some really good explosives, Xynophar said, not quite joking. Jorvik's gaze drifted over the remnants of human history around them. Artifacts that had outlived their creators, sitting in silence, waiting for a purpose. Wait a minute, explosives. That's it, Jorvik, Xynophar said, eyes narrowing. I know that look. That's the look that gets us into even bigger messes. Ignoring him, Jorvik began to pace, muttering to himself like a mad scientist on the brink of an epiphany. We might not have antimatter or fancy tech, but we've got the past. And the past has a way of making itself useful. Are you getting philosophical on me, Jorvik? Xynophar asked, dubious. Not philosophical, practical. Jorvik gestured to a shattered display case. What if we use some of these artifacts, combine them with our tech, old school meets new school? That's half-baked at best, Xynophar said, but there was a glint of interest in his many eyes. Better than no-baked, Jorvik countered. Look, humans may do with worse. We've got ancient ballistae, Roman trebuchets, and ancient weapons, Xynophar interrupted, his skepticism flickering. You think a slingshot's going to save us against a hostile fleet? Not a slingshot. An idea. Humans were all about ingenuity, right? Building pyramids with nothing but rope and manpower. If they could do that, why the hell can't we rig up something with what we've got here? Xynophar eyed a dusty cannon from the Enlightenment era, sitting like a forgotten relic of bygone battles. You might be onto something. Desperation's a hell of a motivator. That's the spirit, Jorvik said. Let's dig deep. Find something that can scare the pants off those bastards. Jorvik and Xynophar spent the next few hours with their heads buried in history's leftovers, scavenging the museum's treasure troves for anything with a hint of potential. The rest of their motley crew pitched in, picking through the rubble like miners in a diamond field. Found anything that'll make them crap their spacesuits? Gorblax asked, using a tentacle to carefully hoist a cracked chalice into the light. It shimmered with an iridescent glow, beautiful, yes, but about as useful in combat as a paper sword. Only if they are allergic to hope, Jorvik replied, tossing aside a tattered banner from an ancient crusade. But we're working on it. Tilm, who'd been brooding in a corner, finally spoke up. What about this? He pointed to a display labeled Medieval Siege Weapons. Jorvik studied the ancient diagrams with growing enthusiasm. We can tweak these, apply some modern power. Xynophar, think we can jerry-rig some of this with the ship systems? Xynophar's eyes darted between the artifacts and the holo display, calculations whirling in their depths. It's risky, but it's not like we've got options spilling out of our ears. Then let's make history repeat itself, for once on our terms, Jorvik declared, feeling the spark of a plan taking hold. As they worked, the council decided to grace them with their esteemed presence, likely to put out the fire of hope before it became an inferno. The group of bureaucrats shuffled in, wearing expressions that ranged from skeptical to downright horrified. One of them, a particularly haughty insectoid named Virilik, peered at the chaotic scene. This is your grand strategy. Using broken toys from the past. Yeah, Jorvik replied, but with a modern twist, kind of like retro fashion, what's old is new again. Virilik buzzed with irritation. This is madness. No, this is desperation, Jorvik corrected. Madness would be expecting you lot to pull a plan out of your collective sphincters. We need a real solution, Virilik insisted, arms crossed with the pompous authority of someone who hadn't swung a spanner in his life. "We're fresh out," Jorvik shot back, "but I hear if you close your eyes and wish real hard, sometimes miracles happen." The council members exchanged worried glances, clearly out of their element. The universe wasn't won by committee meetings, after all. It was won by the people who dared to roll the dice when all seemed lost. Xynophar, catching Jorvik's eye, decided to back his play. "It's not conventional, but then neither were humans. They built their empire on the edge of the impossible." Jorvik nodded. "So, council members, how about you let us try it our way? Worst case, we fail spectacularly, but at least we'll go down swinging." There was a long, tense silence as the council deliberated, weighted by the collective gasp of an entire solar system on the brink. Finally, Virilik sighed, the sound like an airlock deflating. "You have our reluctant assent." "Great," Jorvik said, not bothering to hide his relief. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a history lesson to give." As the council shuffled out, grumbling among themselves, Jorvik turned back to Xynophar. "All right, time to show those bastards what happens when you rile up dead humans." The plan was as simple as it was insane. Retrofit the museum's ancient weapons with contemporary tech, using the artifacts as a conduit for their makeshift arsenal. It was a shotgun wedding of history and science, and if it worked, it would be nothing short of a miracle. Eyes blurred into one another as they toiled under the dim, flickering lights. Jorvik felt the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders, but for the first time, he welcomed the challenge. This was what it meant to be human, to stare into the abyss and flip it the finger. Finally, as the museum's battered structure groaned like an old ship in a storm, Gorblax announced, "We're ready, or as ready as we're gonna get." "Great," Jorvik said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's see if our ancestors were as clever as we hope." Xynophar nodded, his eyes a whirl of determination. "If they pull this off, we'll owe them more than just our lives." "Always knew those dusty old textbooks would come in handy," Jorvik joked, though his heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. As the hostile fleet came into view on the long-range sensors, the AI announced, "Incoming threat detected. Probability of successful defense adjusted to 40%. "Well, what do you know?" Gorblax said, her voice tinged with both hope and sarcasm. "We're less doomed than we thought," Jorvik grinned. "All right, folks, let's make history." The enemy ships bore down on them, a dark tide of metal and malice, and the museum's defenders braced for impact. Jorvik's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Fire!" The museum's makeshift defenses roared to life, a cacophony of ancient power and modern ingenuity. Siege engines flung projectiles with unnerving accuracy, enhanced by the energy conduits they'd rigged from the ship systems. The enemy fleet hesitated, unexpected chaos disrupting their ranks. "Keep it up," Jorvik shouted, adrenaline surging as the first wave of enemy ships faltered. The smell of victory mixed with ozone and desperation filled the air. Xynophar worked frantically alongside him, recalibrating trajectories, adjusting power levels, his dozen eyes darting between displays. "They're regrouping for another pass, Jorvik." "Let him try," Jorvik replied, his voice a growl of defiance. "We've got plenty more where that came from." As the battle raged on, Jorvik felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, they'd written their own chapter in the annals of history, a story of resilience, of unwavering defiance in the face of certain doom. Humanity's legacy wasn't in the artifacts that surrounded them, but in the indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished, a spark of life blazing defiantly in the darkness. And for Jorvik, that was all he needed to keep fighting. The hostile fleet regrouped, preparing for one final, desperate assault. But Jorvik and his ragtag crew were ready, their resolve unyielding. As the ships closed in, he smiled, a fierce, wild grin that was all teeth and challenge. "Let's show them what it means to be human." And with that, the final battle for the Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species began. echoing through the void as a testament to the enduring spirit of a species long gone, but never forgotten. As the hostile fleet loomed closer, Jorvik couldn't help but think about the absurdity of their situation. Here they were, a bunch of misfits huddled inside a museum of dead things, using artifacts older than their grandma's grandma to fend off a technologically superior enemy hellbent on blowing them to space dust. If this wasn't the kind of thing humans laughed about over drinks, he didn't know what was. Jorvik turned to Xynafar, who was squinting at the holo display like it owed him money. "Think we can make space-time sit up and beg?" Xynafar shrugged with all their eyes. "Only one way to find out. We've broken most laws already. What's one more?" Gorblax hoisted a jerry-rigged cannon, its barrel stuffed with a sizzling concoction of historical relics and modern tech. "If this works, I vote we make what would humans do, the new motto." Jorvik chuckled, tapping a control panel that looked like it had seen one too many repairs. "Yeah, right next to hold my beer." The AI, ever the optimistic cheerleader, chimed in. "Probability of success now at 45%. "Hey, look at that," Jorvik said, feigning surprise. "We might actually live to regret this." With a deep breath, Jorvik gave the signal, and the museum's defenses erupted in a cacophony of noise and chaos. Catapults flung modified relics. Cannons belched fire that had no right to exist in the vacuum of space. Each weapon, a Frankenstein's monster of parts and dreams, sang a song of defiance. The enemy fleet hesitated, a ripple of confusion coursing through their formations. They probably hadn't expected a museum to bite back. Jorvik could almost hear their collective bewilderment. "Is that a damn trebuchet?" Xynafar, clicking away at the holo display with the dexterity of a caffeine-infused octopus, was a blur of activity. "Their ships are regrouping. They don't know whether to attack or call a historian." "Good," Jorvik grinned. "Let them ponder their life choices." The museum rocked as enemy fire rained down, chunks of space rock hammering at its already fragile hull. It was like trying to hold a house of cards together during a hurricane, but Jorvik was nothing if not stubborn. "They're coming around again," Xynafar warned, eyes wide with barely contained panic. "Let them. We've got a few more surprises up our sleeves," Jorvik replied, his voice a mix of bravado and grim determination. Gorblax, wielding a relic that looked like a cross between a spear and a glow stick, muttered, "I always said I'd go out with a bang, but I didn't think it'd be this literal." Jorvik laughed, though it was more out of nerves than humor. "Just make sure it's their bang and not yours." As the enemy bore down on them, Jorvik's mind raced. They needed something big, something that would tip the scales. He thought back to history, the scrappy underdogs, the impossible odds. Humans were masters of pulling victory from the jaws of defeat, usually while flipping the bird. He keyed the comms, addressing the entire ragtag crew. "All right, folks, time to dig deep. This is where we find out if our ancestors were as crazy as we hope." With a collective nod, they focused their efforts, pouring every ounce of ingenuity and reckless abandon into their makeshift defenses. The museum's systems groaned under the strain, but they held. Then, like a bolt from the blue, or whatever color space threw at you, an idea hit Jorvik. "Xynafar, can we use the museum's time manipulation artifacts? Give them a temporal wedgie." Xynafar blinked, processing the absurdity. "If by that you mean alter their perception of time, maybe. It's a long shot." "Long shots are our specialty," Jorvik replied, voice steady. "Let's make them dance to our tune." With frantic energy, Xynafar set to work, recalibrating the museum's ancient time manipulation tech. Jorvik watched, heart in his throat, hoping they weren't about to age themselves into oblivion. As the first enemy ships entered the altered field, their movements slowed, like they were wading through syrup. The crew watched in awe as the once menacing fleet staggered, their sleek vessels now clumsy and vulnerable. "Holy hell," Gorblax breathed, awestruck. "We actually did it." Jorvik allowed himself a grin, the kind that came only from cheating death. Never underestimate a good temporal wedgie. Their defenses roared back to life, launching projectiles and energy blasts into the sluggish fleet. The enemy couldn't react, their advanced systems rendered useless by the temporal distortions. "We're turning the tide," Xynophar shouted, their voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. Jorvik glanced at the AI, which was practically vibrating with excitement. "Probability of victory has jumped to 70%. See, told you miracles happen if you wish hard enough," Jorvik quipped, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The battle raged on, each moment stretched and compressed by the haphazard manipulation of time. Jorvik and his crew fought like cornered animals, their fierce determination driving them to push the limits of what was possible. As the enemy fleet faltered, Jorvik felt a surge of hope. They could do this. They could win. Suddenly, alarms blared, a new threat emerging from the chaos. An enemy ship, larger and more menacing than the rest, had broken through the temporal field, its weapons primed and deadly. Jorvik's heart sank, but he refused to let despair take hold. "Time for one last trick," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to Xynophar. "Can we overload the system? Hit them with everything we've got?" Xynophar hesitated, then nodded, resolve hardening. "It'll burn out the remaining systems, but if it's that or nothing—" "All or nothing is our style," Jorvik said, a devil-may-care smile on his face. As Xynophar made the necessary adjustments, Jorvik took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would decide their fate. The museum's defenses roared one final time, a symphony of destruction unleashed upon the approaching behemoth. The sheer force of their assault was staggering, a cataclysm of energy and desperation that defied logic. The enemy ship staggered under the onslaught, its sleek hull crumpling like tin foil. In a final, desperate act, it fired its main weapon, a blinding lance of energy that streaked toward the museum. Jorvik watched, heart pounding, as the bolt raced toward them. In those fleeting seconds, he saw everything with perfect clarity: the faces of his crew, the vastness of space, the history they were protecting. Then, impossibly, the bolt slowed, its trajectory bending away from them. The remnants of their temporal field had distorted space-time just enough to deflect it, a cosmic fluke, a hiccup in the weave of reality. The enemy ship shuddered, its systems convulsing before it finally erupted in a spectacular explosion. Jorvik and his crew stood frozen, silent witnesses to the improbable victory. We did it," Gorblax said, voice choked with awe. Jorvik nodded, overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of their success. "Damn straight we did." Xynophar, eyes wide with disbelief, simply shook their head. "Humans." Unbelievable. As the dust settled and the reality of their triumph sank in, Jorvik found himself grinning like a fool. They'd done the impossible, rewritten the rules, and walked away with a story that defied logic. The AI chimed in, its voice laced with pride. "Congratulations. Probability of survival, 100%. Jorvik leaned back, the weight of the universe suddenly a little lighter. "Well, how about that? We actually lived to regret it." As the crew celebrated, Jorvik let out a long, relieved sigh. For once, they were on the right side of history. And if history was any indication, it wouldn't be long before they found themselves in another impossible situation. But for now, they'd savor the victory, a testament to human ingenuity, stubbornness, and a healthy disregard for the laws of physics. Because sometimes, the best way to beat the odds was to rewrite the rulebook entirely. The Exasperation's bridge was a mess of tangled wires, charred panels, and the unmistakable smell of something that had worked too hard and given up the ghost. Jorvik Mistral leaned against the control panel, more duct tape than actual controls at this point, and surveyed the aftermath of the battle. His crew was celebrating like they'd just discovered the last case of real Earth whiskey, which, considering their circumstances, was entirely justified. Gorblax, still gripping that hybrid spear-glow stick monstrosity, was regaling anyone who'd listen with the tale of their improbable victory. "And there we were," he boomed, voice echoing off the battered hull, "up to our eyeballs in hostile ships, and what do? We pull off a temporal wedgie. Who says you can't teach old space junk new tricks?" Xynophar, who had finally peeled themselves away from the holo display, was in the corner, taking inventory of what was left of their equipment. "We survived by the skin of our teeth," they muttered, half to themselves, half to the universe. "If we had teeth, that is." Jorvik chuckled, his mind replaying the final moments of the battle. It was an absurd plan, but then again, the best plans usually were. "I think we might have to reevaluate our place in the museum," he said, half serious. "What, as relics or as heroes?" Gorblax asked, his eyes glinting with that post-victory madness, the kind that only comes when you've cheated death and lived to tell the tale. Jorvik shrugged, the gesture more philosophical than dismissive. "Why not both? The last human standing, ready to bend the laws of physics just to make a point. The AI, its usual chipper self even in the face of obliteration, chimed in. Analysis complete. Humanity's survival against overwhelming odds suggests they may have been more resourceful than previously catalogued." "Resourceful, stubborn, or just plain lucky," Xynophar quipped, their tone layered with sarcasm. "I'd take a page out of their book if only they'd left us a manual." Gorblax grinned, the kind of grin that promised more trouble than triumph. "Who needs a manual when you can improvise your way to glory?" Jorvik smiled, his heart swelling with something uncomfortably close to pride. They'd done it. They'd taken the odds, chewed them up, and spat them back into the universe's face. They were a ragtag bunch, no doubt about it, but they'd proven that even the most unlikely of alliances could hold back the tide. And for once, the universe had been forced to blink first. As the adrenaline ebbed, the crew began to settle into the reality of their situation. The museum still stood, albeit a little worse for wear, and the surrounding void was strewn with the remnants of what had once been a formidable fleet. A fitting tribute to human tenacity, perhaps, even if it was cobbled together with duct tape and desperate measures. "So, what now?" Xynophar asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group. Their eyes glinted with curiosity, and maybe a touch of the exhaustion that came from holding the universe at bay for just a little longer. Jorvik smirked, the kind of smirk that had gotten him into more trouble than he cared to admit. "We pick up the pieces, patch up the ship, and wait for the next batch of lunatics to come knocking. And maybe," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we start a new exhibit, how to get away with murdering the laws of physics." Gorblax laughed, a booming sound that filled the bridge with echoes of absurdity. "I like it. We can call it Jorvik's Guide to Not Dying in Space." "Catchy," Xynophar agreed, their expression softening from the usual mask of exasperation. "And here I thought my job was just to keep the exhibits dust-free." The AI, ever the enthusiastic optimist, interjected. "New suggestion. Museum could host workshops on human innovation and survival strategies." Jorvik rolled his eyes, though he couldn't suppress the grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And what? Charge admission. Come see the relics that kicked alien ass." Might be our best bet for funding yet. As the crew's laughter faded into the background hum of damaged systems, the weight of what they'd accomplished began to settle around them like a comforting shroud. They'd been outmanned, outgunned, and out of their damn minds, but they'd emerged on top. It was a victory that defied logic, much like the humans who had inspired it. Jorvik's thoughts drifted to the museum itself, the Interstellar Museum of Extinct Species, once a testament to everything lost. Now it stood as a beacon, not of despair, but of determination. Perhaps their little victory would prompt the Council to reconsider humanity's narrative, shifting from a cautionary tale to one of inspiration. After all, they'd taken the universe's worst punch and come out the other side with a story worth telling. The museum's halls, battered and bruised as they might be, held countless tales of survival, resilience, and sheer bloody-mindedness. Now they had one more to add to the collection, a story of a crew who dared to rewrite the rules and remind the cosmos that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog gets to bite back. As they drifted through the void, the exasperation systems hummed with a new vigor, a reminder that while the universe might be vast and indifferent, there was always room for a little human stubbornness. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd find a way to keep defying the odds. For now, they would savor the moment, bask in the improbable glow of their triumph, and prepare for whatever chaos the universe would throw at them next. Because if there was one thing Jorvik had learned, it was that the universe never ran out of surprises, and neither did they. "And who do we thank for all this?" Gorblax asked, his tone equal parts sarcasm and genuine curiosity. "Hell if I know," Jorvik replied, leaning back against the control panel, arms crossed. "But if there's a cosmic bartender out there, I'd like to buy them a drink." Xynophar chuckled, the sound soft and genuine. "Here's to cosmic bartenders, then." And with that, the exasperation continued its slow, steady journey through the stars, a testament to the human spirit, or what was left of it. Because sometimes, the only way to win at the universe's game was to flip the board, cheat like hell, and walk away with a story that was every bit as improbable as it was inspiring. As the echoes of their laughter faded into the vastness of space, Jorvik couldn't help but feel a little lighter. They'd survived the impossible, and for now, that was enough. Because if history had taught him anything, it was that the real challenge was waiting just around the corner. And they'd be ready, jerry-rigged cannons and all.